Welcome to our weekly maritime vlog. I'm Corey Ransom with International Maritime Security Associates. This week we have a special guest and we're going to talk about GPS spoofing. On the vlog in the past, we've talked about different cybersecurity related issues, and today we're going to cover a topic that we've talked about briefly in the past: GPS spoofing. This continues to come up. The U.S. Coast Guard, the IMSA, and other organizations around the world have talked about GPS spoofing. We've seen it ourselves. It's very interesting. So we thought we'd bring on an expert. You guys don't know this gentleman sitting next to me. This is Jacob. He is our Director of IT Infrastructure and Software Development here at IMSA. We're in our Chattanooga Intelligence and Operations Center. So Jacob actually knows a lot about this because he did something kind of very similar with his master's degree. So I said, hey, why don't we get Jacob on the vlog? So I pulled him out of the computer side of the building, brought him over here and said, hey, Jacob, let's talk about GPS spoofing. So Jacob, the first question that I have for you is just kind of give us a little bit of a background on some of the vulnerabilities with our global positioning system around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So the global positioning system is the United States version of a category of services called the global navigational satellite systems. There's various different governments around the world that have produced these systems, the US being the first one back in the 70s, but they actually didn't make it public until the 90s, and that's when it started getting a lot of attention.
Well, we use it in the Coast Guard, and we used to have a box on board the Coast Guard cutter that was a correction, because if we went into a wartime, the US would put basically they would mess up the GPS satellites so that positions would be off to, kind of throw off our enemies. So we had a correction factor that we put in a special secret box we carried on board the cutter. So if we were ever in a time of war and the GPS satellites got thrown off, that we always had the correction factor, so we would still theoretically know where we are.
And that's super interesting because that's one of the vulnerabilities that GPS has, and it's intentional. Depending on if you're a government agency and how you're operating in warfare, you have really three different types of attack vectors that the GPS system is vulnerable to. The first one, like you said, is a spoofing attack, which is where you can shift or change the location or the position of the vessel or whatever agent it is. The second is actually a jamming attack. So you're doing a denial of service and you're denying yourself or your adversary any GPS abilities at all.
Well, the interesting thing, let me interrupt you here. Yeah. So the interesting thing about that is you can actually do a denial of service through the satellite itself or actually locally. So you could really put out a denial of service over the GPS frequency where you're blocking or jamming it over just a certain radius, but you could do that. Say you could put up a jammer outside of a fairly busy port and you could jam the GPS signals within a 25 or 30 nautical mile radius of that particular port or area, or you could shift the signal where you would put in an unreliable correction factor into the GPS. So then all of a sudden, and we've seen this a number of times, where you'll see boats that should be at an anchorage outside of a port and they're 15 miles inland in the middle of land, and that's happened in a couple of places. On our last vlog, we talked about that, and that it's pretty typical in the northern Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Obviously, these are state actors that are doing this and are testing what we think their ability to be able to mess with the system. But this is something interesting that we've seen a number of times, and it happens actually a lot more than you would think with GPS.
One of the interesting facts that I found is there's been over 10,000 recorded incidents of GPS attacks recorded globally around the world at different times. And that's just in the last probably 10 years or so. So that's very interesting. And we're actually seeing a lot of increased activity in different war zones. So in Syria, like you said, in the Black Sea, based on where the locations of high-profile individuals are, they'll do jamming attacks because based on, like you said, the type of equipment you're doing. So back in the 70s when these systems first came out, it took someone with a lot of experience that really understood radio and expensive equipment to do it. So now less than probably $300 to $100, you can buy a software-defined radio and download the software for free. It's all open source, and kind of come up with your own jammer or transmitter based on where you're at. So based on how much money you put into it, you can point an antenna and attack a single vessel, or like you said, you can pull into a port with a strong enough transmitter and do a denial of service attack for the entire port.
The other interesting thing about that is obviously on this vlog, because we're a maritime company, we talk about maritime related issues all the time, but you could carry this into aviation as well, where you could do the same thing, where you could cause issues in aviation, you could cause issues in people's day-to-day lives. I mean, how many GPS devices do we carry with us? So our phones are GPS devices, our tablets are GPS devices. With all of the devices that I carry personally, I probably have 6 or 7 GPS or devices that have the potential to enable GPS with me almost all the time because of all the stuff that I carry, being a tech guy in a tech company. So it's interesting that goes way beyond just the maritime side when it comes to a denial of service or spoofing or issues with that. So one of the last questions I want to ask you is, from a navigation and maritime standpoint, we always want to make sure, and I put myself back to when I was running Coast Guard boats. We always had backups to our GPS and backups in navigation, so that we just didn't have one system, relied on that, and that was it. From a global positioning and navigation standpoint, what are some of the backups that mariners could look at? They may not be as reliable or as in wide use as GPS, but what are a couple of backups that mariners could look at to say, hey, maybe we want to bring on a device that has this type of capabilities or works on this type of system?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that's been interesting because of the types of attacks and the vulnerabilities that the GPS systems and GNS systems are vulnerable to is a lot of regions are putting up their own correction satellites. So depending on if you're in Europe or if you're in India or even in China, there's local constellations that are specifically over that regions that are offering corrections to errors in GPS. But obviously it's always good to have a backup device. One thing that we find interesting is that depending on how you're using your satellite provider, your satellite system actually relies on GPS and its location. So if you lose satellite internet, that could be some kind of indication there's some kind of attack happening, because the satellite won't know where to point itself because it thinks it's in a different location on the Earth. So, and even with that, there's a few different types of attacks that are vulnerable to is even cyber attacks. So all these GPS devices are connected to the network. So even if there's not a local GPS attack, you need to make sure your network infrastructure is secure, or somebody could be actually altering the device over the internet. So,
and that's one thing we've talked about. We've had a number of vlogs on here. If you guys take a look back, we've talked about cybersecurity. We're going to be talking about this again in the future because of IMO 2021 and the work that Jacob and his team are doing. We're going to be launching cybersecurity capabilities on the ARMS platform at the first part of next year, so we're excited about that, to be able to in real time monitor and take a look at vulnerabilities on a vessel's network. Some very cool shipboard capabilities, so definitely more to come about that. Is there anything else interesting that we should mention or talk about that you know about GPS or anything that you wanted to bring up? I always leave it open, at the end of the
just make sure you're checking your equipment and make sure that you're paying attention to what's going on, because there's been various different types of attacks, and they're only going to increase with drones carrying SDRs and local actors getting hold of cheaper equipment. So.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, thanks for taking your time to be on with us. This will not be, I can guarantee you, the last time that you will see Jacob on the vlog.
Awesome. Thanks, Corey. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate all the viewers that we have on this channel. Make sure you hit that like button for all the videos you like. Subscribe to this channel so you get notified when we post new videos. Also, connect to us through our social media, detailed in the banner above and also in the comments section below. If you have any questions when it comes to maritime security, maritime risk management, or maritime regulatory compliance, don't hesitate to reach out to the experts here at IMSA, because we're always happy to steer you in the right direction.